That's why it's easy to remember these things.
Yeah.
Because I don't, garble it up with a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
I don't read fiction, about these things. I just refuse to do that. I refuse to go to movies that have bad galactic politics, that are
politics.
that are into, bumming people out about, making up terrible things about the ETs and stuff, like they're here to eat you and all that stuff. You don't want to poison your mind with that. I don't go to vampire movies or werewolf movies or disembowelment movies. I stay away from those kind of things.
You're not a Twilight guy?
No. Well, no. So there's lots of information about this now, and there's this extremely interesting phenomenon that has started, as you know, that back in 2017, December 17th of 2017, you have the front page story in the New York Times that Leslie Kean and Blumenthal wrote, exposing the existence of a top secret program inside the Pentagon, engaged in professionally investigating the UFO phenomenon. Okay, and they reveal that, and they had some things a little missed in that report.
Like what?
Yeah, like for example, that they thought AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was a lot more formalized than it really was. But Lou goes at some length here. Yeah, is in
your client Lou Elizondo.
Lou Elizondo has written this book. It's his for the last 3 weeks has been the #1 bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. That he goes into detail now about how AATIP kind of evolved out of AATIP, the Advanced Weapons Special Access Program, and how he was doing this kind of informally, and et cetera. But so he's clarified all of that in his book.
We had him in here for episode 237.
Right.
It was a very fascinating conversation. I think we're trying to do another one in November because there was a lot still on the bone there. One of the things that I think, and I want Lou to talk about this in November just so he can kind of once and for all make it clear. But one of the things I think that's confused people in the past with how he's explained it, because again, there was a lot of moving parts here.
Yes.
Is that he's said things like, oh, I wasn't a part of AATIP, because it seems like he's making the assumption that AATIP, when he was first being read into this stuff in 07 or 08, AATIP was transferring into what became AATIP. Is that now the timeline shows that maybe that didn't happen until 2012, 2013, 2014, and then some people on the more skeptic side argue that like you can't even find data in the FOIAs that AATIP was real. When did AATIP? When was that born, as far as you know? Maybe that's the best place to start.
Well, I would actually say that it wasn't born. it was conceived of. That you can read the stuff in the book, the details of what he talks about. But what happened is that there was an original program that was the Advanced Weapons Special Access Program. That the funding, the original $22 million that Harry Reid, got authorized. Yeah. Senator Reid got authorized. That was a program that was designed to do two things, actually. One was to try to figure out how to back engineer the craft that had been recovered, but it was a more public, even though top secret. It was a more well-known program inside the Pentagon than the actual deep program, where they were involved in knocking down UFOs and actively, aggressively going after them.
Knocking down?
Oh, yes.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. This is not just a passive program where they just wait and see if there happens to be a crash of a UFO. We're not talking about they've admitted, quote, crash-retrieval organizations, but they were actually knocking them down. They've developed technology to knock some of these things down, and they've engaged
like EMPs and stuff.
Yes, it's an extraordinarily powerful technology, we'll call it, that is capable of disabling the craft and forcing them down.
Isn't that a little like this is where I get confused, and it gets beyond what my brain can really create, because it gets to questions that are beyond the known laws of physics that we
Hmm.
have.
Hmm.
But like you talked earlier about the Drake equation and the conservative estimate of there being 2 to 6
Yes.
potential civilizations, and you use numbers like potentially 8 billion years ahead or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I hear things like that, I do wonder how a civilization, let's say they're even 1 billion years ahead, not
Hmm.
8,
Hmm.
how they could possibly be
Yeah.
stopped
Yeah.
by some caveman or less than that technology like EMPs, I'm assuming based on our timeline, that we have.
It's an extraordinarily sophisticated technology that's been developed to take them down. Now that doesn't mean that they haven't compensated for that. But there were a number of the vehicles that were recovered, intact vehicles that were forced down by this technology. And so what I'm saying is that this wasn't a passive, just go find one that happens to have accidentally crashed, gotten hit by lightning or something.
It's an active intergalactic war.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. That's one of the major concerns about this, that this would be considered a potential act of war against them, because our military people were considering it an act of war for them to come and shut off our nuclear missiles.
Yes.
And so that they viewed that as a kinetic act, as they referred to it, against our forces. And so they engaged in kinetic actions against the craft, and that they've brought some of them down.
And so you're saying that this program that was in charge of that was far deeper
Yes.
and more classified than, say, OSAP.
OSAP. That OSAP was what Senator Reid, in a way, did, and they authorized the funding for a $22 million program to kind of investigate it at kind of another level, strictly for trying to figure out if there was any kind of access they could get to the technology for weapons development. It was an advanced weapons program. But the fact of the matter was there was a much deeper weapons program, a classified weapons program that involved the kinetic activity going after the craft in the attempt to back engineer them.
Do we know how far back that went, and or who was in charge of it?
We know. I don't know the exact date yet as to when this new technology got developed, the ability to force them down and to recover the intact craft. We know that it exists, and we know that it was formulated. We know that there was another highly sophisticated program that was developed by the Central Intelligence Agency that was called the Golden Domes program. That was a technology that was actually able to discern the craft when they were still masked. They were still cloaked, and that the CIA developed a technology that was able to locate them.
Wow!
Yeah, and there was an entire center that the Central Intelligence Agency had controlling that.
When was this?
This has been going on for over 10 years. Now
Pre-OSAP or now?
This was pre-OSAP.
Okay, so that would mean maybe like late 90s,
Yeah.
something like that starts.
Yeah, and so that the bottom line is that this activity, this aggressive activity toward the craft, is a great source of concern, and is part of what they're so concerned about quote catastrophic disclosure.
Yeah.
Being able to reveal that the national security state apparatus has taken it upon itself to engage in activities that could be perceived as an act of war against this civilization. In making up their own mind that, them having shut off our nuclear missiles was an act of war, and so therefore they thought that they were entitled to retaliate against them. That whole kind of activity going on outside of the control of Congress, is contrary to the Constitution of the United States. The United States government and the Congress is supposed to be in charge of making decisions as to whether we're going to engage in acts of war toward a foreign power. They've got all kinds of efforts that have been made by the Covert Operations Division of the CIA, the 5412 Committee of the National Security Council, to take it upon themselves to take initiatives under the Covert Operations and the Intelligence Act that they've done. But the bottom line is that in my judgment, this is not constitutional. That they are committing perjury, they're lying to the United States Congress, they're conducting military operations against the craft that would be considered an act of war, and so therefore that there is some strong reason to believe that they've engaged in some sort of communication, which is designed to establish some sort of set of protocols pursuant to which they engage with each other. The craft are clearly engaging in activities that are viewed as surveillance. That they're surveilling our nuclear aircraft carriers, our nuclear submarines. They're monitoring places where our nuclear weapons are stored. They're monitoring our private nuclear facilities, energy facilities, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So they're engaged in a very effective surveillance system about our nuclear capacities. Now, national security state people immediately experience that as dangerous to have some sort of foreign power, surveilling our top secret facilities, et cetera. Whereas other people on the planet view our activities in developing those major weapons and threatening to use them, in deploying them, in targeting other people with them as being acts of aggression, which they are, and that we know from the from the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance documents, for example, we know that in fact that the United States national security state apparatus is engaged in an affirmative, aggressive program of attempting to establish full spectrum military dominance over the planet, and they've acknowledged it.
When?
This was in April of 1992. That after Gorbachev dissolved the Soviet Union. And secured the agreement.
HW in office?
Yes, with HW and James Baker, both agreeing with Gorbachev to refrain from attempting to recruit any of the the former republics of the Soviet Union that would be released from the Soviet Socialist Republic, to try to refrain from engaging them in recruiting them into NATO or any of the Eastern Bloc countries. That was the agreement. And as soon as Bush Jr. came in, Cheney came in.
Thank you.
They just defied that and started going after them and starting to recruit them into NATO. That's what's generated the present situation that we're in now. Okay, so the bottom line is that. Immediately after Gorbachev signed the release of all of the socialist republics and dissolved the Soviet Union voluntarily pursuant to that agreement, what happened is the Dick Cheney, who was the Secretary of Defense at that time under the Bush Senior administration, and Paul Wolfowitz, and Scooter Libby, and Doug Feith.
All the neocons.
And the guys that were in the Defense Department under Dick Cheney gathered together and they prepared the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document. And in it, they actually proposed that they push back against the inclination to reduce the military budget now that the Soviet Union had voluntarily stepped back from the Cold War. And they said, we can't allow this to happen. We have to increase the military budget so that we can establish full spectrum military dominance over the planet. And that the purpose of that is to secure and maintain our continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials that are needed by the members of this new Northern Industrial Alliance that we're going to be forming. There's lots of details about that. A lot of people don't know about it, but they exist now. In that whole program that has been undertaken by Dick Cheney and his cohorts has been operational now for some time. And the problem is that once they mounted that under the W. Bush administration, in defiance of the previous agreements that have been made, what's happened is it's been quite clear that we have been engaged in an activity that is ever increasing the possibilities of nuclear confrontation with both China and with Russia. And so that you see a major increase in the activities of the UFO vehicles, intensely monitoring our nuclear capacities, the deployment of our nuclear forces, trying to determine, how aggressively we're going to be utilizing our nuclear weapons capacities.
Since 92?
Since 92. That's exactly right.
Because my other question was going to be to tie this back together, I guess, in a way, is these programs you're talking about with crash retrieval and, God, there was so much in there you said. I'm going to miss some of it. But, it's all, when we talk about it, we tend to talk about it from an American-centric view.
Yeah, right.
Right? But other countries, world powers especially, like China, like Russia, they have their own programs that look at this stuff.
Sure.
Is there evidence to show that there is some sort of intelligence sharing on that going on, or that has been going on over the past several decades?
Yeah, the answer to that is negative. It's not. That the adversarial attitude that has been adopted primarily by Cheney and the neocons from the W. Bush administration on down, and was then later endorsed by Obama and Hillary Clinton as the Secretary of State.
Birds of the same flock.
That they maintained that same kind of momentum once it was going. What's happened now is that that's set up such antagonism with Russia and with China that there's very little cooperation that's going on in this area. And so the United States, the question that arises is, what is it that's motivating this new movement that's been happening since 2017? What is it that's motivating Lou and Chris Mellon and Dave Grush and Carl Nell and the other folks that are coming forward and leaning in on drafting this particular bill? This is the bill that got passed by the United States Senate in 2023. This is the 64-page bill that has set up an entire regime to undertake a controlled disclosure of some significant portions of the information that are known about the UFO phenomenon.
Controlled disclosure?
Controlled disclosure. That's what this is. This is the UAP Controlled Disclosure Act. This is what they're planning to do. They have a 7-year period during which they want to reveal some portions of the information and conceal information that they think would constitute a catastrophic disclosure.
Okay.
That's what they're engaged in.
All right. Before we get ahead of ourselves on this, a couple things. Number one, another guy I'd like to get in here is Chris Mellon, because I'd like to talk with him and judge him on his own merits. And I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of it too, we associate people and automatically make assumptions about who they are. That said, as a guy, I'm sitting across from you who is very well aware, as you've demonstrated, of, say, some of the Gilded Age families and so on down that's happened, where certain powerful factions tend to have their hands on the levers of everything that runs our government. Yeah. When you see a guy like Chris Mellon, who's literally a member of the Mellon family, and I forget, it was like his grandfather, I don't even remember, but
his great-grandfather.
Right, great-grandfather was...
The Mellon Bank.
Yes, but also was involved in the creation of the CIA, Warner, or something like that. Jesse Michaels knows that information, not me, so go listen to him on that. Yeah. But isn't it interesting that he's the guy who's walking the papers out of the Pentagon and going to the New York Times with this? Is there a little bit of a tingle that goes off there? Why him of everybody?
Chris is an extraordinarily interesting guy, that's for sure. And I think he knows more about the deeper aspects of this program than most of the other people. I do believe that probably there is some correlation between his family background and him being able to be trusted with more of that information. If you go back into the period of Brown Brothers Harriman and the robber barons that the Mellons were part of, and the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Harriman family, that elite financial industrial set of families that actually formed Brown Brothers Harriman in a kind of a common investment operation where they choreographed things that we talked about the last time of actually choreographing the creation of the Third Reich and setting up the Third Reich, and instigating the attempt to on the part of Germany to establish full dominion over Europe, for example, as the bulwark against Bolshevism. That those are extraordinarily real phenomena. It's quite clear that it's not Brown Brothers Harriman now that have continued that linkage. That the power that was that once resided in Brown Brothers Harriman when Allen Dulles was the legal counsel for them, and George Herbert Walker was the CEO, or Prescott Bush then was the later CEO, that there was a lot more rigid control over that elite group, but the progeny of that are more spread out.
Yes.
But there's still a, I just got back from Yale earlier today, and it's embarrassing, walking around Yale looking at all the kind of preppy, well-washed, polished, aristocratic young kids that are there at Yale still. They're still there, and Skull and Bones is still there.
Yes.
And so there is a lot of that stuff. They're resisting letting go of the kind of covert power that they've had, those wealthy families. Chris Mellon is an extraordinarily sophisticated guy, very subtle guy, is extremely knowledgeable about what it is that's going on, and he would be among the more valuable interviews.
Yeah.
To actually have him being candid about what it is he knows, which he won't be. He won't be revealing as much information as some of the other people would.
Why is that?
Because he knows more than they know, and he's closer to the people that are the legacy group people.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a pejorative about him. This is, in a certain sense, a compliment.
It's factual.
That he's a more sophisticated person than a lot of the other people that are involved here. So that they're hammering down. I mean, Lou is a tough guy, as you know. I mean, Lou is the armadillo.
Yes,
he's the tough guy, here, and he's pushing forward on this. He's smart and articulate, and a lot more sophisticated than the people in the 2506 Brigade that he hails from. But he is still and he will admit that he's more of a blunt instrument involved in this. You get other people like Carl Nell, for example. Colonel Carl Nell is kind of another step into the more sophisticated realm. I mean, he was in charge. He was a major person in the United States Army that was called in to kind of stand up entire units and companies inside the military to perform more effective missions. He was the one that was anticipated to be the original head of Arrow when they were talking about setting that up. So he's a very sophisticated person, extraordinarily intelligent, and is in a certain sense more subtle in many ways than Lou is. Lou will admit that, and Chris Mellon is more sophisticated than any of them. He's the most sophisticated of all of them.
I kind of get that.
So he is the person who is probably the most responsible for trying to choreograph this operation in a way that can become effective. And so he's a person of some really substantial substance that one would want to talk with to determine what he's decided at any given point to reveal.
All right. I want to put a pin in the UFO crash retrieval program within the Pentagon because I do want to come back to that, but I want to stay with this for a second.
Yeah.
Because when you use the words, I believe it was controlled disclosure.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. This is where it gets, you kind of have a philosophical debate going on because what I mean by that, I want to know everything, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a human being. I'd love to know whatever intelligence we have about whatever the hell is out there.
Well, you think you do. You think you want to. That's because you don't know.
I don't know what it could. Right.
You don't know what it is you don't want to know.
Right. But then I'm saying because I don't know that, I say right now I want to know everything.
Sure.
And everyone else out there listening, I'm sure, says something similar.
Yep.
I also recognize, though, that to the point you just made right there, if there are things that are literally provable behind the scenes that like humanity as a whole couldn't handle, which again, this is now intelligence communities making this determination, which is a slippery slope.
Oh yeah, no.
It's I
don't think they're entitled to do that. You're right.
They may not be, but I could then see a scenario where all these guys, everyone you just named, anyone who's associated with the government, who that's been what their job is, they do have a controlled disclosure where they come out and, people could use the word psyop here and it's fair, but that might be a little strong for what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And they basically tell you some things that are true to obfuscate some things that they don't want to tell you about. Now you represent Lou Elizondo, so I understand there's some things you can't say here, attorney-client privilege, but could you see a scenario where that's very real?
Yeah, I don't think that's the right verb, the obfuscate. If I possess 100 units of information about a particular subject and I reveal 85% of them to you, it's not obfuscating. It's just a limited disclosure.
Yes.
When you obfuscate something is when you release the 85% of the information and then you lie about the other 15%.
But isn't that semantics? That's effectively what they'd be doing if they didn't tell us about. If they said, "Wow, look over here at this shiny thing," don't look at that over there. Well, that's kind of lying, no?
Well, one just needs to be careful in this particular area. Okay. It's not kind of like lying, sort of. That's dangerous territory. That what's going on here is an extraordinarily sophisticated process, pursuant to which there are people inside the national security state is a bad idea to begin with. Mm-hmm. When you have a national security state, they're locked into a second paradigm worldview, a dialectical worldview that there's good guys and bad guys, and and we're authorized to do really horrible things. I told you about Henry Kissinger, in his introductory lecture every year in Gov 182, about if you don't believe that our country has the right to lie, cheat, steal, and even kill, on behalf of the narrow self-interest of our own nation state versus others, then you shouldn't remain in my course, that kind of thing. Yeah. That mindset in and of itself is intrinsically evil. It sets up an intrinsic dialectic between portions of the human family that is inevitably going to generate conflict. Okay, and the problem is that you have people that are raised inside that culture, in the military and in the intelligence community, et cetera, and they're trained not only to conceal certain information, they're actually trained to actively attempt to deceive others.
Yes.
Okay? And the problem is that they developed those skill sets vis-a-vis some alternative nation states whom they viewed to be adversaries in their quest to establish full spectrum dominance over the planet. Yeah. And the problem is that they turn those skills against the American people. And they turn those skills against Congress.
That's right.
In that that's unconstitutional for them to engage in that type of activity, in that the creation of the nation state, the national security state, in and of itself, creates that intrinsic danger, and it's come to manifest itself over the period of the last 79 years or so since they created it. Okay, in 77 years now since December of 1947. Okay, so that's what we're encountering right now is the inevitable repercussions of a national security state. So you have an entire community of people who believe that they're not only entitled to, but they're obliged to somehow actively deceive the American public, and to deceive Congress. This is violative of fundamental premises of our Constitution, and that we have to undo this. And we have to undo this in the context of this particular subject. And so that we want to be careful during the process that we're doing this, of being clear about what we're accusing people of doing. That the people here that we're talking about with Lou and the rest of the people that are involved in this endeavor to establish a UAP controlled disclosure campaign plan. Mm-hmm. It is clear that they're at one and the same time attempting to reveal some things and intending to have other things not revealed. Okay.
And what do you think what do you think the highlights of those things not revealed are? That they don't want to reveal? Like what kinds of things on a high level?
Some of the things are more obvious and are less troublesome because they're so obvious. For example, they'll say, first of all, we have to make sure that whatever the disclosure process is, that it does not alter the present elements of power on the planet. Well, now you can either agree or disagree with that. Right. I tend to disagree with that. I don't think the elements of power on the planet right now are doing that well. I agree. Bringing us to the brink of thermonuclear war. Well, but they would argue that, that's brinkmanship. You get to the edge of nuclear war, and then you end up, getting, you just get to dissolve the Soviet Union. You get to get access to the at least to the major breadbasket areas of the Ukraine, even if you lose the Crimea, the warm water port to Russia. And they engage in this kind of conduct all the time, and they're threatening the potential thermonuclear destruction of the entire planet as the axis on which they apply that particular set of skills. I think that's a really bad idea. I agree. I think that our human family ought to step back from that. And then they say, well, it's fine for you to say that because you're not charged with responsibility, these heavy responsibilities we have, they say. And it's what I've discovered in my 50 years of practice is what I've discovered is that there's an awful lot of people inside that national security state who have become so disenchanted with what it is that they've been asked to do in order to effectuate this kind of dialectical confrontation that they are ostensibly engaged in, which was at one time, at least in their own minds, attempting to stop, authoritarian governments from the Soviet Union from taking over the world. But when they in fact found themselves supporting authoritarian governments and torturing people and killing people and assassinating people, et cetera, after a period of time, they began to suspect there's something wrong here. Yeah. that they're actually doing the very things that they were taught as young people were the very things you're trying to stop from doing in the world. And so that we've been able to establish communication with some of these people, and they're willing to come forward and say, here, let me share some of the information that you need in order to try to reform the national security state apparatus. Okay? Yes. That my opinion is the national security state apparatus has to be more than reformed. It has to be overcome. It has to be dissolved. It has to be dissolved in the Soviet Union. It has to be dissolved in China. It has to be dissolved.
How realistic is that, though, Danny?
Well, how realistic is destruction of the whole planet? It's not a really good idea.
I think that's unfortunately, I think that's more realistic than getting all these prisoner dilemma stuck countries, espionage units back, reined in.
Well, I think that that's the challenge that we have, and I think that one of the dynamics that has to play into this is increasing the level of consciousness of the people, okay, and exercising some of the powers that we still have in a democracy. Okay, that the avenues are there for us to do this. It's an extraordinarily difficult challenge. I'll agree to that. But we have to know what our ultimate mission is. Our ultimate mission is to dissolve away the structural sources of injustice, inside both Western and Eastern civilizations right now, because the elite that have risen into power in both hemispheres are threatening thermonuclear destruction of the planet.
Yeah.
Okay, they're engaging in the maintenance of control over the petroleum industry, and polluting the planet and polluting the oceans, and threatening the life generating capacity of our planet. Okay, they are on the very brink of actually instigating a potential intervention on the part of an extraterrestrial civilization in order to preserve the life generating capacity of our planet. That's what's happening right now, and that's what's panicking them. So all of a sudden they've come forward saying, wait a second, that we think that we're on the brink of some potential intervention here. And if they intervene in an aggressive enough way to shut off our nuclear weapons capacities in both East and West, that's going to reveal their presence. And we aren't ready yet. We haven't really taken the steps that are necessary to prepare our people for the intervention of an extraterrestrial civilization like this. And so you see this thing happening right now, kind of this mysterious process going on of some element inside the national security state coming forward, with the either pretense
Yes.
or at least posture of being good guys all of a sudden.
That's right.
Of that they've seen the light. And that they think, I'm really feeling bad about, how secretive we've been.
Let's
and
tell
the,
everyone.
The excesses, and so, but let's make it clear. We're not here talking about revealing everything. We're talking about revealing some things. And there's some other things that we just really can't reveal, but we can't tell you what those are. Under any circumstance, we can't tell you what they are. But one of the things that they'll lead right with is, of course, whatever the changes are that are going to be flowing from disclosure, we can't have them alter the elements of power on the planet right now. That's number one. Okay, that would be, in their view, catastrophic.
Yes.
Primarily because they view themselves as being assigned responsibility for keeping
Right.
those people in power.
Right.
That's how they view their military covert mission. Okay,
They want to sustain what they have.
That's right. And so there are other things that that one's an obvious one, right?
Of course.
Then they have others like that. Well, there may be some things that have been done on behalf of maintaining the secrets down through the decades. They may have engaged in untoward activity toward private citizens.
They would never do that, Danny.
And that would be catastrophic to reveal some of that, because if you revealed that, then the confidence of the people in that elite would be diminished.
But doesn't it matter like when it was too? Like eventually things like MK Ultra got revealed in some ways, but it was after the fact. So it's like,
but for example, you don't know that at MK Ultra, the two major guys that were protecting the kind of death of people that occurred were Warren Burger, who became the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and Jacob Javits, who became the United States Senator of the state of New York.
Yeah.
You don't know any of that stuff, right? And they say, well, you can't reveal that stuff. Because that would really undermine people's blind confidence in the elite. So you can't do that. So see, they have. That's why the people that are the guardians of the national security state are not the right people to be making these decisions, because they are so wedded to the blind allegiance to the kind of elite that are in charge of the planet right now. In that they're used to the brinkmanship of threatening thermonuclear destruction of the entire planet on behalf of maintaining their continued privileged access to the strategic raw materials, that they view that to be a legitimate mission. So that they really can't be the ones that are making these decisions. All of that will come down to who the people are that are going to be on this 9-person commission. right? This panel, the board of review.
This sets out.
That this sets out. Now, they clearly are intending to have those 9 people be people made up of the exact same elements that have kept it secret for
like a
all this
Warren
time.
Commission.
Yeah, that's right. And you can't let that happen. And so that what we have to do as citizens, we have to be able to develop a strong enough citizen base of educated people who know how to put pressure on their congressional representatives and senators, et cetera, to be able to make sure that the people that end up getting appointed to that particular commission, are people who are not dedicated to the same kind of preservations that they're talking about. They're not dedicated to maintaining all the elements of power in the exact same position they are now. They're not dedicated to keeping secret whatever some of the excesses are that some people have gone to protect the secrets, et cetera. And if you can get them to start listing the kind of things they think are catastrophic, then what you have to do is you have to say, well, the people that are going to be on this board, cannot be devoted to protecting that kind of information, because that's not really catastrophic. All that really is goring your own ox,
Sure.
in the national security state. And so that your myopia in determining what is catastrophic from what is potentially catastrophic in reality is not to be trusted. Okay, so that the dynamic that takes place once this gets to be passed by the House, this is easy to get passed by the Senate because they passed it unanimously out of the Senate Intelligence Committee. They passed the 64-page bill, with
what's wrong with the House?
The House is the fact that they've got guys like Turner, who is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, who's from the 10th Congressional District of Ohio, where the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is. You got the guy like Rogers, Mike Rogers, over in the 2nd Congressional District in Alabama, where the Redstone Rocket Range is, where they're doing the back engineering training. They've both persuaded Mike Johnson, who's kind of hanging on by the skin of his teeth, of being the Speaker of the House, who can be threatened by any given one person to remove him, that they talked him into refusing to allow the bill to come to a vote. If this 64-page bill that was passed virtually unanimously by the United States Senate were put to a floor vote in the House, we'd have 400 votes to pass this.
But they won't put it to a vote
because a tiny handful of people that are wedded to the aerospace industry, right? But this is eventually going to get passed. I mean, it's clear that the political forces that have come together to make this the proposal that the United States Senate is being proposed by the majority leader of the Senate, with Chuck Schumer, and guys like Marco Rubio, and Mike Rounds, from South Dakota, that this is going to become the law. And it's going to take a few passes to get this done. And it's clear that the struggle is going to be over who the panel is going to be, and who the president is going to appoint to that panel. And so that we know that we have access to the democratic instrumentalities of our government if we will do our job. You and I know, how lazy average American people are. People would spend more time watching football games than they would bothering to read this statute.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
It is also boring.
And, no, it's actually quite exciting. Actually.
You think that the way they write this is exciting?
No, but what I'm saying is that when you realize that they're actually talking about releasing the top secret information about the UFOs, and they start saying they're talking about flying saucers and they're talking about extraterrestrial life forms, when you see this in a bill like this, you say, now this is pretty interesting stuff, okay? But the fact of the matter is that we're not even requiring them to spend their time reading the bill. We're telling them what's in the bill. Here, we'll give it to you in like a 1.5-page synopsis.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we have to do is get people being willing to exercise their constitutional responsibility as citizens if they really want to do this. Okay. And we have to be able to demonstrate to the people that want to have the controlled disclosure that the American people want more than they're willing to tell. Okay? That's what we need to do.
We're also dancing around a 500-pound elephant in the room here, which is the fact that we're not just talking about the government itself when it comes to this topic. And this is where we can bring in the UFO crash retrievals, because that's the best example right here. you're with this bill, you're talking about the government being able to reveal what they know and what they have access to. But in speaking with Lou and hearing some other guys who are familiar with this stuff talk, allegedly there's a huge problem where, if you want to just paint the term military-industrial complex on it, I think that's pretty apropos. There's a huge problem where the United States government over the past 6-7 decades has given private organizations, meaning like the Lockheeds of the world, the Northrops, whoever, fill in the blank here, access to not only head up some of these programs, but to literally have carte blanche to do what they want, such that the evidence that they may recover from something like a UFO crash retrieval isn't even owned by the government. Even if the government declares eminent domain, we don't even know where some of this stuff is because the organizations themselves have it. How do we rein in something that's now 7 decades in the making, potentially?
What you do is that actually in this 64-page bill, they are included. This does have an eminent domain. This does have subpoena power. This does have the right to issue subpoenas, to take depositions, to go after them, to dig this information out from them.
But you got to know what you're looking for, no?
Yeah. I've done this for 50 years. Once you start going down this road, you have a pretty good idea of what you're looking for. And our job is to identify what it is we're looking for, and at least in broad categories, and to make sure that they don't dodge us. We've succeeded in doing this over and over and over again. Okay, so this particular bill is drafted to deal with those aerospace corporations. Okay, the House bill doesn't. They specifically took out demanding that the aerospace corporations pony up what all their information is. Okay, they did that intentionally. So, and it's an obvious thing that they've done.
Of course.
Okay, so what we have to do is turn our focus on the House of Representatives to make sure that we can get those 3 guys out of position. You get rid of Turner as the head of the Intelligence Committee, get rid of Rogers as the head of the Armed Services Committee, and you get rid of Johnson as the Speaker of the House.
Meaning, vote them out of office altogether?
No. If in fact the Democratic Party takes over the House of Representatives, all those 3 guys lose their job. They're out, and so that the people who ascend into positions of authority now are not yet in the pocket of the aerospace industry, okay? And
How do we know that?
Because we know who they are, okay? And so that if in fact the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, they will pass this 64-page bill, okay? They will pass the bill, all right? And as long as whether the Democrats hold control of the Senate or not doesn't make any difference, because the Republicans inside the Senate support the bill too. And so that the Senate, no matter what happens with it, is going to repass this bill. And if the House goes over into the coalition of Democrats, the Democrats are going to vote for this. So then we're into the struggle over who's going to be put on that panel. Okay, and so that what I'm saying is the reason that you have lawyers, the reason that our people have lawyers, the population like myself, is that we can help steer the way through this process so that we can get at them. Now, you have the right to make a rejoinder saying, yeah, but doesn't it always turn out getting a little too little, too late? Isn't it clear that the Congress is really under the control of the military-industrial complex and the major capitalists, et cetera? The answer is yes, unless and until we do our job. They realize that the American people have been cowed into not exercising our authority, okay? And we're letting them get away with this. And what we've got to do in the New Paradigm Institute, for example, we've got to be able to explain to people the kind of dangers that this is generating. That this is a dangerous situation that we've got here now. That we've got the doomsday clock of the American atomic scientists, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, has now reset the doomsday clock for the first time. Now it's 90 seconds before midnight. This is the shortest fuse on the doomsday clock that has ever existed since it was created in 1947, because the United States military now has moved nuclear missiles, the B-61 nuclear missiles, the mid-range nuclear missiles, into Germany and into Poland, and now they're moving them into the Eastern Bloc right now. Okay, and Putin has responded by giving a command to his field commanders now to train up the deployment and the use of tactical nuclear weapons in the field in order to protect those two provinces that they've taken back in Crimea.
Yeah.
Okay. So we know that that's happening now. And just last week, the Biden administration has now issued a what they call nuclear deployment employment executive order, preparing to put short fuses on 1,600 United States missiles in the submarines and in the forward projection for immediate first strike, and to coordinate a first strike against the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea all at one time. Okay? And they've issued that order now to start preparing that. And that's why the doomsday machine now the doomsday clock has been put to 90 seconds short of midnight.
Jesus.
Okay? So the people need to understand that. And they need to understand that this is correlated with a major upsurge in the UFO surveillance of all of our nuclear facilities. Okay? And that they've demonstrated their capacity to shut them off. They've demonstrated their
for
capacity,
decades,
and they've demonstrated their capacity to be able to shut down our nuclear aircraft carrier
and in other
battle
countries
groups
as well.
That's right. And so that type of intervention, if it becomes necessary for them to intervene in order to preserve the life-generating capacity of our planet, so as not to be destroyed by thermonuclear exchange, that's going to reveal their presence. Okay, and that the national security state is not prepared yet for revealing their presence. So what they've done is they've come forward with this process right here. They've come forward with this process to figure out how they can choreograph releasing an adequate amount of information to start preparing our people so they can continue to utilize nuclear weapons as a threat to establish and maintain their control. That's what they're doing right now. So we're not being bamboozled by what they're up to here.
But this is also, so the people who are involved with this and getting this forward are the people who were part of part of AATIP and a part of OSAP.
That's right.
Before that. And those programs, regardless of however they morphed into each other, they talk all in skiffs. It's highly secretive. Guys like Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée are involved, some of the brightest minds in the world. Yep. But still, you say that specifically like some UFO crash retrieval groups in the Pentagon were far more secretive than that?
Oh, yes.
So how sinister is that stuff then?
Very. Very. And those are the people that we have to figure out whether we can get the people here that are doing this to be on our side, to be able to dig those people out and put them out of business. That's the key to this thing.
Do you think that's possible? Cynically, my head goes.
Yeah. No, I do.
Don't think so.
I do. I think it's possible. It's a dangerous game because those people view themselves as authorized to use lethal force, and they view themselves as authorized to use lethal force against these people.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And so it's a dangerous game, But as Father David says, nobody gets out of life alive here, And so what we've got to do is we've got to be willing to put ourselves at risk in order to save the planet, okay? And to save the planet from a potential intervention which we're not yet ready for.
Yeah.
Okay, on the part of the extraterrestrial people. And so what we've got to do is start getting our people prepared for this so that it can be a positive relationship that we have with the extraterrestrial civilization. I mean, we've got to come to grips with this reality.
Yeah.
And that what we have to do is we have to take steps to try to preserve as much agency as we can for our own sovereignty. As a species on our planet, that we ought to have as much authority to make our own decisions as possible. That if we're so stupid as that we've come right to the brink of an actual thermonuclear war that mandates the kind of intervention of an extraterrestrial civilization to come in and say, "That's it, you've abused your authority, you're out of business now."
Right.
Okay. So the question is, how much out of business are we going to get put here? Yeah. Are they going to come in and take over entirely and say, look, you guys have threatened the destruction of the life-generating capacity of your entire planet. We can't allow that to happen. Okay, so you've lost your authority. What we have to do as a citizenry is we have to demonstrate that we merit preserving some degree of agency over our own decision-making process. And the way that we have to do that is by taking care of these people and getting rid of them. Okay, that's what we have to do. We have to demonstrate that we're capable of mobilizing and getting rid of this elite that is threatening our planet for their own personal self-advantage. We've got to be able to demonstrate that, or else we've forsaken our rights. You know,
there's something that makes me want to jump to, but before I do, maybe some context would help here, because I had stopped you earlier from going into this a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that after the Carter stuff went down and then was handled and went away, the next real way that you got involved with this was when you got a call from Dr. John Mack.
Yes.
Which was, what, early 90s?
1994.
Okay. Didn't he die in 1994?
No, he died in 2004.
He died in 2004. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misremembered
He was hit by a car in London in 2004.
Yeah, was he hit by a car?
Yes, he was. I was on the phone. I was on the phone with Danny, his son, within an hour. You know,
was the car driven by someone suspicious?
No, he's in prison still. It was a drunk taxi cab driver going just, too fast, and John just looked the wrong way, stepping off the curb.
Okay. My conspiracy brain thing was on that.
But we were on that like white on rice.
But you get the call from him. What did he want from you specifically? And can you tell people who Dr. John Mack was who don't know?
Dr. John Mack was the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And one of the protocols that had been adopted by the national security state infrastructure in order to protect the secrets of the fact that they were in possession of a non-human origin extraterrestrial spacecraft in the bodies of the non-human occupants of the spacecraft, in that they were engaged in this secret program of bringing down intact craft so they could back engineer them and try to figure out how to fly them and use them for weapons. Okay, that part of the protocol that they'd adopted was that if anybody were to assert that they had seen a real UFO, the first thing that they would do in the military is saying, if you're insisting upon filing a report of having seen one of these, the first thing you have to do is take a psychiatric exam, and they would mandate this, and they would say, we're doing this as a favor for you, because if you're going to be making these kind of accusations, we want to make sure that people realize that you're mentally stable. So the first thing they would do is order you to get a psychiatric exam, which goes right into your professional file, right? And so it turns out that John Mack was the place to which they would send them as the Harvard, go to Harvard Medical School to get the head of the clinical psychiatry department to perform the services. So John had done this for several high-ranking military officials who had actually gone forward and insisted upon filing, the UFO sighting reports. For example, at Maelstrom, when they shut off our nuclear missiles, what's it said? Colonel Dewey, what was his last name? Dewey Donaldson, I think his name was. Said,
right.
that he insisted upon filing a UFO report, saying, "Look, I've got my missiles completely turned off here." He said, I've got to report this. So he ended up doing that. They ordered him to get a psychiatric exam. He ended up going to Harvard Medical School, right? And John Mack is the guy that does the test. And John ends up, after half a dozen of these guys over a period of years, saying, this is really peculiar, because these guys are all within the normal parameters of being psychiatrically healthy, and yet they're all insisting upon doing this thing, which is not a career builder for them. Why in the world are they doing that? And he ended up talking to his mother about it, interestingly. And she said, you should talk to the Hopkins boy. That there was a family friends of the Hopkins family. Bud Hopkins is a fellow who has been gathering lots of information about people who've had these kind of face-to-face encounters with the people that are flying these UFOs. And so he ended up getting to meet Bud Hopkins, and Bud Hopkins introduced him to more and more people who had not only sightings of the UFOs, but had direct face-to-face contact with some of the occupants.
Face-to-face contact.
Oh, yeah, face-to-face contact with some of the occupants. That started to happen. And so John started interviewing some of these people.
Including the Zimbabwe 94
kids. That was in 94 later. Yep. But he started this earlier in 1990. He was doing it for almost 4 years before what he decided to do is, he decided finally, after having interviewed about 100 of these people, he decided he was going to write an article for the New England Journal of Medicine saying, this is very peculiar. because there's this phenomenon going on in people who have had no contact with each other, had no information about UFOs
Right.
ahead of time, are all telling these similar stories. And so I'm going to write a paper for the New England Journal of Medicine. So he submits it to the New England Journal of Medicine, the preeminent peer-reviewed journal for medicine in the United States. And within a matter of days, they send it back to him, say they're not going to publish it. And John is taken aback. John's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's won the Pulitzer Prize for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence, right? Lawrence of Arabia.
Wow.
And so he's taken aback, and he says, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this, and I'm going to make more footnotes and more scientific details, and I'm going to send it back in. So he sends it back in, and it turns out within 2 days, the executive secretary for Arnold Relman, who is the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, sends his executive secretary back to John's office with the envelope unopened and said, Dr. Relman has ordered me to bring this back to you and to point out to you that it's been unopened, that we're not going to only not print it, we're not even going to read it. And so he's taken aback by this, and he ends up contacting a publisher because he won the Pulitzer Prize. He could do this. And so he gets it published, okay? And it comes out immediately, within a day of the going on the newsstands. The dean, Arnoldson, comes in to the not Arnoldson. That's Arnie Arnoldson was the commander of the Maelstrom, but it's Arnie Arnoldson. That Tolson comes in, the dean of the medical school, and says, John, I see that you wrote this really interesting book about the abduction stuff. You and I ought to be able to chat about this. And if we're going to chat about it, why don't we have a few of the other faculty come in? We'll talk about this.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.